All right, man, peace. You know, brothers, as we go through life, we encounter certain people who are extremely gifted. And some people are so gifted that they suffer from the curse of the gifted. The curse of the gifted basically is when someone is so overly and excessively gifted in a certain area or maybe areas that they become alienated from others because they become cognizant of the fact that they're so used to being misunderstood, or they become so accustomed to other people trying to use them for their gift that they shun the world, they ostracize themselves. Or if they work in an environment where they have to use their gift for the benefit of all people, they don't play any games. They don't bullshit you. They're not concerned with optics. They're not worried about how they're going to be perceived. They basically don't have time for the bullshit. They're not going to play your game with you because most people play the quote unquote game. They go according to what they believe is going to allow them to fit in with the masses. People who are excessively gifted do not worry about fitting in. And thereafter, they will oftentimes do or say things that will put them under great scrutiny. But it's not great scrutiny for them because they don't give a shit about how you feel. And that is Mr. Bill Belichick. He's going to tell you exactly how he feels. And really, he's not even going to delve so much into his feelings. He's going to give you his perceptions based on facts as he perceives those facts to exist, and empirical data as he's been able to compile. Why am I saying all this? Because in Super Bowl week, of course, one of the topics at hand is where does Tom Brady rank amongst the all-time greatest NFL players? The mainstream liberal media is currently trying to promote him as being the greatest NFL player of all time, and Bill Belichick is pushing back. He's saying that Lawrence Taylor is the greatest player that he's ever seen. So, of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
So, consensus amongst most is that Tom Brady's the GOAT, right?
No, that is not consensus amongst most. That's the sentiment that you guys are trying to propagate across the airwaves and get other people to accept. I don't even believe that Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback that I've ever seen. He's right there. You certainly can make an extremely compelling argument for him. But me personally, I would still take Joe Montana. The first Super Bowl that I ever watched was Super Bowl 24 between the 49ers and the Broncos. And I've never seen a quarterback as sharp as Joe Montana was. For those of you brothers out there who were too young to see Joe Montana, imagine Tom Brady if he had Aaron Rodgers' legs. Meaning what? Joe Montana was not as reticent to gamble downfield as Aaron Rodgers was. He was not as risk averse as Aaron Rodgers has become. But he also had the brain of a Tom Brady, and he had the accuracy of a Drew Brees. That, to me, is how I remember Joe Montana. Now, of course, he played in a much more physical era where the cornerbacks were allowed to be much more physical with the wide receivers. The secondary in general was allowed to be much more physical with the wide receivers and the tight ends. And Joe Montana was one of the first quarterbacks to have a 2-to-1 or a 2.5-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, which by today's standards is relatively pedestrian. But back then, it was exemplary. Now, in order for a quarterback to have a great season, he has to have at least a 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. But back then in the 80s, if you were a quarterback and you had a 2-to-1 or a 2.5-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, you were off the charts.
Yep. 9 Super Bowls, 18 seasons. Okay. However, his coach begs to differ. Please take a listen.
He's a great quarterback. I certainly put him up there against anybody, but,
I just basically feel that Tom is a bit overrated. I mean, I like the guy. He's okay. He can do what we need. But to compare him to other greats from the past, I just can't do it. And you guys are basically trying to blow Tom's head up to cost us this game. After we win this game, we're off to Cincinnati.
I don't really feel like it's my job to rate people. He's a great player. He's been a great player for the New England Patriots. Certainly his record is unmatched.
If any of you guys have an issue with that, you can see me outside. As DMX used to say, get at me, dog.
Glad he's my quarterback.
Max Cal, you're an expert in all things Boston sports, New England Patriots,
yes.
all of the Cliffs, all of the above.
Can't vacation on Cape Cod anymore.
No, it's all over for you. Are Belichick's comments a shot at Brady?
No, they're not meant to be a shot, but the people in the mainstream liberal sports media will project them as a shot. Because once again, when people are excessively gifted, they don't particularly give a shit about how you feel, especially when men get into that early 60s range. If you ever encounter like a man, like real man who's around 60, 65 years old, he don't give a fuck about how you feel. He's going to tell you exactly what's on his mind.
No, and I know yes, because there you go. He's like, LT's the greatest player I've ever coached. Mm-hmm. What about Brady? Is he the greatest quarterback? He can't even bring himself to say that. It seems like a shot at Tom Brady.
We have to understand once again that Bill Belichick has been coaching in the NFL for going on 40 years. So seeing as how he's been coaching in the NFL for that long, he's going to evaluate Tom Brady not only based on Tom Brady's exploits and his excellence, but in contrast to the rule changes. Bill Belichick is a nuanced thinker, so he's always going to contextualize every question.
You can't breathe the wrong way when you say Tom Brady's name without Tom Brady fans criticizing you, right? Like, it's impossible. It's like with Beyonce with the Beehive, right? You can't say anything.
Beehive.
Well, Brady has a very strong cult of personality. There's no doubt about that. But he's earned it.
Beehive, that was called. You can't say anything wrong if it's construed in any way as being negative, even slightly. Everyone comes after you. Same thing with Tom Brady right now.
People also have to understand that Bill Belichick feels like he owes his career to Lawrence Taylor. Lawrence Taylor was able to make him look like a genius, which he ended up being. But sometimes you need that in life. You need people to believe in you before you're known. And what LT was able to do was to take many of the defensive concepts that were taught to him or shown to him by Bill Belichick and make them pop or jump off of the blackboard. And according to Belichick and Bill Parcells, Lawrence Taylor was by far the most gifted player and also a genius when it came to defensive concepts. According to Brian Cox, the former standout linebacker for the Miami Dolphins and New York Jets, he states that Bill Belichick told him that Lawrence Taylor is the only player that he and Bill Parcells would allow to sleep through their defensive meetings because they knew that he knew everything already.
The exact same thing. In fact, before I go on, and I've taken this from Stephen A. Smith, it was a very good idea. Anytime, Stephen A., you say anything about LeBron that might be construed as negative, what do you do?
I get my tagline going on. I list all the beautiful superlatives that you put out
So
there.
please let me see the graphic on Tom Brady. Is that possible? Because I won't say anything about Tom Brady until this comes up. He is the GOAT. He's the greatest of all time. I've said this for years, by the way. I said he's the greatest quarterback of all time.
To me, Brady was never even in consideration as being the greatest quarterback of all time until he was able to defeat the Atlanta Falcons. To me, you had to win more championships than Joe Montana for me to even consider you because you had lost a couple already. Montana never lost a Super Bowl. He was perfect in the Super Bowls. I believe he had 11 touchdowns, no interceptions. So until Brady was able to defeat the Falcons and he became a 5-time Super Bowl winner, that was when I started to consider him as possibly being the best quarterback ever.
I've recently said he's the greatest player of all time.
That's not true.
He's an amazing teammate. Everyone says it. Fantastic father and husband. He shows it time and again. Remarkable competitive fire, stretching the human body to the absolute limit year after year. Is everyone satisfied now where you know where I stand on Tom Brady?
No, he doesn't eat shaved vegetables, diet's
Because all anyone says is cliff. In other words, I read an actuarial table and I say, oh, at this age they fall off. Hater! You hate Tom Brady! He's Superman! He's a god! He's not a man! So Belichick does that and he's taking a shot at Tom Brady. Look, I know what I think Tom Brady is the greatest player of all time because he's a quarterback, right? So you do that for almost 20 years at that position and you're the best ever, you have to be considered the greatest. But
I would say that he might be the most impactful player ever. I think oftentimes there's a curve that's given to NFL quarterbacks where many of the personages on television like to give them an excessive amount of credit for their greatness. Now, due to the fact that the quarterback always receives the football every play, he's going to have the most impact on the football field, especially in this era where they've taken away a lot of the physicality. But to me, that still does not make him the greatest football player ever.
But I know what Belichick means. When my eyeballs were on Tom Brady, I never got that feeling. It's the consistency, the longevity, the clutch performances, the leadership, the cohesiveness of the team.
In other words, Tom Brady is like the Hank Aaron of football. Hank Aaron was never thought of as being the best baseball player of his era. When he came into the major leagues in the 1950s, Willie Mays, Mickey Mantle were all thought of as being better than him. Frank Robinson, even Ernie Banks was feted more than Hank Aaron in the early 60s. And then you turn around and we're in the early 70s and Hank Aaron is challenging Babe Ruth for most home runs ever. So Hank Aaron was another athlete who just snuck up on people, similar to a Tom Brady. Of course, baseball is different, but I understand the concept that Max Kellerman is trying to push here.
That add up to that for Brady. But it's not like eyeballs on him. That's it. Belichick coached LT, so he's like, that dude was bad. If you watched Walter Payton, you go, I don't know if I've ever seen something like this. Brady's not that dude. Brady does it over his body of work. But if Belichick doesn't say, if he doesn't kowtow to Brady, if he doesn't worship at the altar of Brady in the right way, somehow he's taking a shot at Brady. No, he's not.
Also understand that Belichick knows Tom Brady more than anybody else. He's almost like Tom Brady's football dad. And your dad is never going to give you as much credit as people who are in awe of you. It's a very similar dynamic to what Greg Popovich and Tim Duncan had over the course of their 20-year partnership. And that, to me, is the comp for Brady. People try to compare Tom Brady to Michael Jordan. Now they're currently trying to compare him to LeBron James. To me, the comp in the NBA for Tom Brady is Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan had almost an equivalent relationship with Greg Popovich. They had a very similar rapport where Popovich would call him out in front of his teammates to show the rest of the team that if I can criticize him, I can criticize all of you, so all of you better fall in line. Tim Duncan also shorted himself when it came to salary time, as Tom Brady does. So to me, that's the comp.
That dissertation was lovely, I must say. But nevertheless, it doesn't make you right, because clearly he was taking a shot at Tom Brady. Now, I don't mind. Because if you're Bill Belichick and you're 225-7-9 as the head coach for the New England Patriots, you run an organization for the last 19 years. You're also the head coach the last 19 years. There's been plenty of instances where your defense has come to the rescue. Not to say that Tom Brady hasn't come to the rescue, because we understand how phenomenal and how great Tom Brady is. We get all of that. But if football is as complicated as we say it is, as if it has multi-dimensional facets that contribute to the outcome of a game, not just defense, not just offense, not just special teams, but running an organization, picking personnel, making sure that the personnel acts accordingly. Some of the dysfunctional drama that we've witnessed right through the National Football League like a damn virus over the last season or more. We haven't seen those kind of things happening in New England. I'm sorry, last time I checked, the quarterback of the New England Patriots doesn't have much to do with that. That comes from the man upstairs, which would happen to be Bill Belichick when it comes to the New England Patriots. So if everybody is sitting here and you're Bill Belichick and you're coaching and being an executive in the NFL during a time where the game has become soft as cottonelle tissue, where you can sit up there and get flagged for having bad breath. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you were a defensive coordinator like Bill Belichick was during the 80s into the 90s, where the game was had rough rider tactics, it was far more physical. You didn't sit up there and see offensive players protected nearly as much. And you're coaching LT, Lawrence Taylor, and all of this stuff. And you hear people talking about Tom Brady like he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Not only are you looking at your background as a defensive coordinator, coaching the great Lawrence Taylor, but you're also looking at the role you played in contributing to a level of success. And the more you elevate Tom Brady, the more it takes away from the greatness of Bill Belichick. Who would know that better than Bill Belichick? So of course he spoke up for himself by making sure to remind everybody, Tom Brady's a great quarterback. I'm proud to have him. I'm happy to have him. He's this, that, and the third. But Lawrence Taylor is the greatest player that I've ever coached. He is saying that because he wants you to know that on his watch in New England, you can act like it's Tom Brady all day, every day if you want to. But there's a coach that was there handling his business.
All right, but then it comes down.
So to make a long story short, Stephen A. Smith, you're basically saying something along the lines of what I'm saying, which is that Bill Belichick has been coaching in the NFL long enough to know that Tom Brady is great, but when he's judged on the same scale as a Joe Montana or other quarterbacks who played in a rougher era, and Tom Brady, we have to give him credit, he also played partly in that era because the NFL was very rough throughout the 2000s. But Bill Belichick understands that there were other quarterbacks who played in the 80s under far harsher conditions. So I agree with that part of your soliloquy.
It comes down to this question. Do you think he's telling the truth, or do you think he's saying that for effect?
I think it's both.
Okay, here's the bottom line.
I agree with that.
You think LT made Belichick look better, or Belichick made LT look better?
It was a symbiotic relationship. That is why Belichick feels so much respect for LT, because he understands that if it were not for LT, most likely people would not have lavished him with so much praise as a genius. Because no matter how great a chess master you are, your pieces have to be up to the challenge. They have to be there. If it were not for LT, Belichick would never have gotten the opportunity to coach the Cleveland Browns and thereafter be the coach of the New England Patriots. That's what he's saying.
Lawrence Taylor?
Yeah. LT made Belichick look better than he would have otherwise looked.
LT is arguably the greatest. We all know how we all feel about LT. But if a coach can hurt you by putting you in a position not to succeed, then we have to give them credit for putting you in a position to succeed.
Please answer the question. Belichick's aware, like, as great as a coach as he is, he knows, boy, that dude made me look even better than I really am because he was just different. And Belichick also knows, as great as Tom Brady is, man, I make Tom Brady look even better than he really is.
Yo, Lawrence Taylor was off the charts, man. Like, if you ever watch any Lawrence Taylor highlights, he looked like he must have ran a 40 in about 4.5.
Is because I'm putting him in a perfect position to win. Tom Brady's not like a freak of nature kind of player. He's not Aaron Rodgers or Patrick Mahomes. He does it on consistency, longevity, IQ, arm.
You're giving me facts that I'm not trying to dispute. What I'm saying to you, I'm going to throw it right back in your face, Max, because of what you say about Belichick. When we talk about LT, whether it's a Harry Carson or others who raved about the genius of a Bill Belichick, whether it's Bill Parcells, who you said, it's not an accident that he didn't win Super Bowls without Belichick. So you speak to the greatness of Belichick as a defensive coordinator. You speak to the greatness of him as a head coach.
Let me say this very quickly, though. Bill Parcells was a great coach himself. There was nowhere that Bill Parcells went where he did not make the team a contender for a championship. Whether it was with the Patriots, the Jets, the Cowboys, etc. Everywhere he went, he turned them into a contender. A lot of people do not remember this. You have to go back a ways. But there was a time period where the New England Patriots, they were pretty much the standard for decrepitude in the NFL. They were terrible. And when Bill Parcells joined that team as the head coach, he totally turned them around.
You speak to the greatness of him as a personnel guy and an executive, but we're going to ignore that. When it comes time to talk about Tom Brady, oh, hell no. The fact of the matter is that Tom Brady, as great as Tom Brady is, what it comes down to is that if we're going to, this is not basketball. I've seen plenty of coaches who are marginal, but you got two players that are...
Look at that old white man with the Tennessee Volunteers hat on in the background. Oh, my goodness. I love that nigger Stephen A. Smith. He's so funny.
Phenomenal, and they can come to the rescue. In the game of football, because of the multiple dimensions of it all, you need a head coach. Bill Belichick has to give more credit to Tom Brady, and I think Bill Belichick is saying that.
Right, he's telling the truth. So he's taking a shot at Tom Brady by telling the truth. If you tell the truth, you're not taking a shot.
Listen.
Once again, Bill Belichick is operating on a whole nother wavelength. He's operating on the wavelength of being a completely transparent truth teller. Bill Belichick is that type of guy who, after he finishes coaching, is going to write a book about his experiences. And he's going to say things that people are going to assert or assess as being a marginalization of Tom Brady and some of his other players. But all it will be is a completely transparently honest assessment of what he understands those players to have been when it comes to their weaknesses or their strengths. He's that type of guy. I promise you, he's going to write some crazy book after he retires from coaching. And everybody's going to talk about how he's hating on his former players, especially Tom Brady.
Listen, I'm not saying he's taking the shot like, oh my God, the hell with Tom Brady. What I'm saying is that on the outside looking in, the fact that you would pick Super Bowl week in your 9th Super Bowl appearance with this same quarterback to make that statement.
Well, he was asked a question, Stephen A. Smith. What would you like him to say? Would you like him to lie?
It's not an accident why he answered. Now, you can say it's a shot or not a shot.
He answered
I'm not knocking the question.
So here are his options. Either at that moment he says he is the greatest quarterback ever, which I think is true. Maybe Belichick doesn't think it's true.
He clearly does not think that is true, Max Kellerman. I guarantee you that Bill Belichick, he assesses quarterbacks based on the premise of how many problems does he think a certain quarterback will cause for him defensively. And I guarantee you that he probably ranks John Elway above Tom Brady. He probably ranks Joe Montana above Tom Brady as well.
He either tells you what he doesn't or he tries to phrase it in a way that avoids controversy.
Do you believe somebody can be telling the truth with no malintent whatsoever, but it can still be perceived as taking a shot at a person?
Absolutely.
Perceived,
Of course.
yes.
That's all I'm saying.
Of course, the
That's all I'm
truth
saying.
will set you free. All right, first thing,
The
just
truth
get
shall
started
make you
here.
No, Stephen A. Smith. Actually, Molly Karam got it right. It's the truth shall set you free. But anyway, I like this little segment because we got a little glimmer into the mind of Mr. Bill Belichick. He does not care how you feel. He does not care what you think. He's going to tell you what it is, and either you can deal with it or you can't. But anyway, peace.